All right, cool. All right. So yes, my name is Carolina Rubio MacWright, and I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm an artist. I'm an activist, and I have a lot of different hats, but essentially just like a dreamer, right? How about you?
Very cool. Now, I am nowhere close to being as eclectic, but I'm basically in venture capital. So, a tech investor. We invest in early stage companies primarily in India. Um, you know, I like to describe myself as someone who's, I think your background is similar, lived in a bunch of different places. So I grew up in the Middle East. I worked in the US for a bit, spent time in Africa, in France, in Kenya and Liberia, sorry. And then did my MBA in France and Singapore and then came back. So, been around, and I think, that's added some diversity and perspective, hopefully, to me. And now I enjoy what I do in the venture capital space. So hopefully, would love to chat more about, your work in the art space. I don't have a great background in that space. My mom is an artist, though, if that helps. But yeah, I would love to know more about, your journey in art and how that shaped and informed your thinking.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that you might think that you're not super artistic, but I think people sometimes, they think of art as painting or, some sort of traditional form, right? When
Sure.
in reality, I discovered when I went to law school that all I was doing was really essentially composing something, right? I was using laws and I was building a story.
Yeah.
So it was very creative, right? And I think I was successful because I was pulling from random, statutes and random thoughts. And I think that eclecticness and background in the arts really helped to sort of move the area a little bit. And I was able to propose, a point of view that others didn't see.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying is creativity helps in every field, right? The more creative you are, it helps you do better, essentially.
Absolutely. And I think, there's like a beautiful place where, you know, there's a, like, your job is very essential, right? You have a bigger picture in mind where, okay, where is the bigger, like, where is the greatest impact? And, how can, like, how far does your money go here versus somewhere else? And so you are, if you have the values, right? And the correct vision for, with climate change in mind and, the different lenses, I think, you are an artist in essence, and you are sort of, you are specifically sort of positioned to create a lot of impact.
Yeah. No, I love that definition, right? Because now that I think about it, a lot of what VCs do is really try and match patterns, right? So you're basically trying to look at everything that's happening and try and fit that into some sort of model and mental framework, and then try and project or predict what the future will look like. So it is, in a lot of senses, and I think some of the best investments are, ideas that come from maybe one industry and then applied completely differently, right, to another industry. So in that sense, that it is truly artistic in that sense. I hadn't thought of that, so thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I wasn't happy just as a lawyer, and I wasn't happy just as an artist. So that's, I created my own thing where I mix law and art, and I find ways in which people can learn their rights through a kinesthetic, right? Seeing those patterns, like people might not learn when they're scared, right? They're not going to retain anything. People might learn through visual or auditory or conversational, right? Like there's all these different ways of learning. And so how can we tackle all those ways so that people can sort of feel that the information in their bodies and not just like going in from one side and like leaving the other side. And so, it was very much looking at those patterns like you do, where I looked at the patterns of, well, I have all these immigrants that come to me, and when they come to me, they've already messed up their case because they didn't know that they had all of these rights before they could speak. So how can I stop it before this continues? And so, for me, it was by empowering these people, my people, with information, and also nudging spaces where they can become visible, where they can be seen as equals, like that's a way in which, you know, I can change this statistic and I can change this pattern so that we can have more successful cases along the way.
Very interesting. I'd love to, you know, dig a little bit deeper in what you just said, which is, do you find that I'm fascinated, right? The first time that I'm hearing about, you know, using art to help people remember laws, right? And know what their rights are, for example. I think that's so impactful. But would love to, you know, have you seen instances where using art not only helps people remember things, but also be just more confident in their ability to win cases? I don't know, but have you seen that in your own experience or how?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, it is less about people retaining the laws as it is just the process of, you know, they have to choose, you have to make all of these decisions. You're in a studio where normally, you know, immigrants are the ones cleaning those studios. They're not the ones participating in these spaces. So you immediately start sort of pushing the spaces and being like, no, you deserve to be here. Like, yes, you are here as an equal. And you slowly see the progression of confidence, the progression of empowerment, the progression of, wait a minute, I can totally do this. And so we've seen instances where, you know, they might not remember what to tell an ICE agent, but they have left their abusive husbands, or they have called the police on their bosses because they realize they have rights and they shouldn't be abused verbally or other ways by their bosses. So it's more about the investment in time and sort of creating this space where it's like, no, you deserve to be here, and people will step up to the plate, you know. With education, without education, I find that the beauty of art is that it's an equalizer, right? It creates a space where you might have an amazing education, and one of my students, most of them have third grade maybe or kindergarten education, but when you sit down in the studio and you have a lump of clay, you are equals, right? You will not know what to do with that lump of clay. And so there's a symbiosis, sort of like this really beautiful exchange where you can see each other's humanity.
Very cool. No, thank you. That makes so much sense. You know, I was something I was reminded of, you know, when I was at INSEAD doing my MBA, one of the first things that they made us do so we were divided into groups, and these are groups that you were going to spend the next year with, and so you had to bond and really get close to these people, right? And one of the first exercises we did was actually go into a room and just draw things that were meaningful to us, right? So we all got pieces of paper and we all drew, and it was quite, you know, everyone was vulnerable, everyone showed up, and then we exchanged what we had drawn, and I think that helped people bond. So, you know, I think and this is so important in business, right? Leadership teams, bonding exercises, and I think art plays such an important role there. I know it did in our group. I think people just felt much closer after that experience, and, you know, there was some tears that were shed as well. So we'd love to, you know, maybe touch on that aspect of how leadership teams and bonding experiences can be created through art.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you get to the essence, right? I think there's so many walls and so many expectations, and when you get to business, I love how Honda, for instance, has all their employees wear this, you know, like this sort of suit thing, like zipping. I don't know how to explain it, but everyone, every engineer, every manager, everybody has to wear it, because it creates sort of that equalizing effect where your idea will be heard as equal to somebody else. And I think, you know, the reality that we live in the US is, you know, people of color are not in these spaces, right? And even when we are in these spaces, we are dismissed. And so there's a lack of sort of innovation, in the sense that, you know, we have the Latino population here is very, very big and very powerful as far as money, but they don't cater to us, right? And so it's a market that hasn't been explored at all. And so I think that you know, when we talk about leadership and when we talk about using the arts like they did in your class, for instance, it's really powerful, because people can open up and you can see, you know, sort of commonalities that you would normally not see in a meeting, right? Where you're just throwing degrees and whatever. So I do a lot of icebreakers for companies, and it's really beautiful how people open up with just, don't introduce yourself with your name, but with a memory, right? Or with, usually I'm very tactile because I think, we're three-dimensional. So the Zoom thing is very hard for me, because 70% of communication is really through
body language.
So,
exactly.
So I find that the language barrier is not really a barrier in any of my workshops because people are having a conversation in other ways. So I find it fascinating that we depend so much on visual, and that we really underestimate the power of the other senses and just like the gestural power.
No, on that point, I find that a lot of leaders, I think the Western society, but more generally, I think all societies live predominantly in their heads, right? We think a lot. And do you think, there's so much, you lose out on so much information and the ability to access deeper, I would say, intelligence to some extent, and just decision making, right? By living in the body. And I think art helps you, just feel and be more present and live in the body. I think you'd agree, but I'd love to expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I was exposed to a lot of trauma growing up in my country. And I feel like, you feel that, right? It stays with you. And so a lot of times I feel like like you said, we live in our head, or we live almost outside of our bodies. And so I think, I mean, I use running, but also my art is a way for me to sort of move that energy, and for me to be able to be sort of present and express those things that are hard to verbalize, right? Sometimes again, like you see a painting, or you see a sculpture, or you hear music, right? I use the example of opera because I used to listen to opera when I was 11 years old, and my parents would be like, "You are so weird," because I didn't speak Italian or German, and I would be like, "Oh my God, wait for this moment," and I would cry. And I had no idea what was happening in the story, but I was feeling the emotions of the singers. And so I find that fascinating, that you can feel, regardless of like, the music, the words, like you can still, it evokes a feeling. And so that's, to me, the magic of art.
It transcends culture. It transcends everything. No, it's beautiful. And I know some leaders who actually do a therapy, right? So whether it's music therapy or dance therapy, and I've spoken to some, and they find it very, very powerful, like things they weren't able to deal with, whether it was a business decision, or especially during COVID, letting team members go and letting teams go. It's quite a painful process, right? And a few of them have expressed that art really helped them. So their therapist, obviously integrated some of these forms during therapy, and that was helpful. So I think that's another way I think art helps.
For sure. For sure. So we actually, during the pandemic, since we couldn't meet with our students, we created an 8-week program with a mindfulness organization. And what we did is we taught our students how to self-regulate their emotions through mindfulness. And so, we knew that was the best tool that we could give our students. Of course, we provided dance classes and like all sorts of drawing and things that would sort of nurture the soul. But when it came to that emotional toll of losing family, of, losing your job, of not knowing where the next food is going to come from, right? These are all realities, right? I work with a very undervalued community that lives in the shadows because our laws still haven't changed and don't recognize 11 million undocumented immigrants. And so we wanted to make sure that they had, we can't offer them all counseling, right? So we made sure that we taught them tools so that they could self-regulate their emotions, and for them to learn and have it forever, right? Where they will be able to sort of encounter an emotion and not reject that emotion, but just sort of live through it and be able to come back to, where they have to come back. And, it was incredibly powerful for our students to be able to have that tool.
Do you think the business community is doing enough to integrate arts? I think I know the answer to that, but
No.
what more can be done? So let's say, we have a portfolio of companies in our, obviously a venture capital fund, but how could, say, a VC fund, I don't know, would love to hear your thoughts, maybe use some of the tools and techniques and use art to help businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because we think outside of the box, we have a very different approach to issues, right? Like, I think I miss my calling, where I wish I had been like, a problem solver, because I love a challenge, and I'll be like, okay, show me a puzzle and let's figure it out. So I think that's what I loved, why I loved law. But when I'm making a piece, or when I'm creating a whatever it is, like, I'm looking at the issue, there's always a problem, and I'm tackling, okay, how can I get as much audience as I can? How can I challenge a captive audience? How can I, can I make this virtual? Should I make this online or physical? So I think that artists, even just as a resident artist for companies, could be an amazing model where, you could have just an observer that, can recognize, what, it's more effective if you do this, or how about pivoting and, like, this company or this audience might be better for that. Yeah, I think that fellowships, or even internships, or even, periodic interventions with artists where your team can feel really integrated is so important. Because if you don't have a strong team, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you that, right? That if you don't have a strong team that is very communicating, and sometimes you have people working that are very talented, but they're not working in their talent, right? So you got to move them from talent. You don't necessarily have to let them go. You just have to reposition, right? Or see where their talent is. And so I think that sometimes artists are better equipped because they're, they see things in a different way. So I think that there's incredible value in bringing artists, especially if they're local, or even if they're not, because I feel like anytime I've come to a place that I don't know, which has been like, you have a lot to give, because you can see things from a completely different perspective, and you don't owe anybody anything, right?
No, it's a great point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of our portfolio companies obviously trying to navigate lockdown and COVID, and teams are now remote, and how do you build a culture remotely, right? And pre-lockdown, everyone was working together. You had daily sprints and things of that nature. Now everything is sort of broken, and so they started doing these once a week activities, right? And some of it was just like wine knowledge classes, all things of that nature. But there was some for art and things, and it was well attended, and people actually enjoyed just taking some time out of their routine, and just drawing and painting and sharing what they'd drawn on Zoom. So I think it can even be done in this environment, and it works quite well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's not it's not an impediment. Like, we can still work with the tools that we have, right? Talk about getting creative. You can work around it. I don't think it's as powerful, obviously, because we are human after all, but I think that it's an incredible way to build up morale, especially for those workers that are younger, that maybe don't, and even for the ones that have family. Like, I have a family, and so I have 2 kids, and I have to manage all of that, and their emotions and all the things. And so it's nice to be able to escape that for a minute. And art is an incredible tool. Whether, I was taking a visual listening class, and so it's listening, and you do like a graphic writing, drawing the
so whatever comes to your mind as the song, as
no, so somebody will tell a story, and then you write the story and you draw the story, or like a conversation or whatever it is, but you have to feel the words, and as you write it, it has to sort of make sense. And I found it incredibly powerful, because I realized I don't listen very attentively, right? You're sort of listening, but then you look at the tree, and then you're like, oh, I gotta, what's my next meeting, and I'm thirsty, and all of a sudden you're like sort of listening.
All the time.
but you're not really listening. And so when you're having to draw, you really have to retain so much more of the information. Even if you're not drawing, you're just writing the words that are important so that you can sort of, okay, it's like doing a visual brief. It was incredible because I recognized that I am not necessarily fully listening, like fully present.
I would say 99% of this planet is like that. So don't be too hard on yourself.
I know.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
That's really interesting. How do you see the arts? You know, you keep asking me questions. How do you see the arts potentially like helping your field?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one. I think, you know, and this is to the detriment and probably the fault of the industry in some sense, right? You're so focused on targets and you're so focused on, you know, the product and go-to-market strategy and things of that nature that unfortunately art is still considered in at least from our vantage point, you know, slightly fluffy, right? For lack of understanding, right? It's just, and that's really sad because I think people haven't realized how powerful it can be. And I think what's hopefully slowly changing is, you know, arts is making its way into things like therapy and leadership development. And I think unfortunately, only when business leaders see art as a way to positively impact their bottom line, either in terms of Hello?
Sorry. Okay, you're good.
You're back. I was just saying, as you know, only when I think business leaders see the impact of art positively on their bottom line, either in terms of improving employee morale or reducing churn or, you know, just better employee health and then things of that nature. And, you know, we've seen this, that when things are too intangible, the business world typically doesn't like it, right? So I think the more we can do to make art, the impact of art more tangible, that will create massive adoption within the business field. I could be completely wrong, but that's the way I think, you know.
No, and I agree with you. It's just hard to,
super hard.
It's really hard to, you know, when I think of metrics, right? And like the effect of the classes that we do, it's really hard to be able to quantify, right? To qualify, like, right? The quantitative and the qualitative, like, it's really hard to do that because,
very hard.
You know, I don't go back to my students 2 years later and I go, hey, how's life going? Like every once in a while, I'll hear the effect of, you know what, I'm not making $8 an hour anymore. I'm actually making $21 an hour. You know, and like we've been able to follow some of the cases where women have left their husbands and they started their own business, or women have, you know, made sure to negotiate Metro cards and negotiate a raise and negotiate holidays. Like all of these things are happening, but it's just really hard to really say, right? How do you put a money figure on that? How do you, right? Like you can't, just like you can't put a money on happiness.
No, I completely agree. And so and the thing is, I think it's very hard to change mentality of people who haven't felt the positive impact of it. And so I think this starts honestly at the education in schools, right? Because those kids will be the leaders of tomorrow. And then you don't need to make the hard sell about how impactful art is. They've already experienced it firsthand. And then when they join companies and when they start companies, you know, they will automatically bring art into the workplace, hopefully. And I think that's what I would actually, you know, I think focusing on school kids and education makes a lot of sense from that perspective.
For sure. I mean, I think that as we are progressing and evolving as humanity, right? I think that we're realizing that we're not just like a single, right? We used to be put into little boxes, right? I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse. And I think people are realizing that there is space for being multiple things, right? Where the value that I bring to the legal world in envisioning other policies that could work for the problems, or in the art world, what I can bring all of these issues that are unseen in the fluffy art world, right, to the forefront so people are aware of what's happening in other parts of the world. is an important platform, right? And it has again, like a captive audience where if I'm talking about the death penalty, for instance, that's not something that people in my neighborhood, would want, we'll talk about, like they're not going to be like, let's talk about the death penalty. But if I present it in a museum, they'll be forced to think about it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's, posturing art as like that traditional, the painter with a brush. It's a creative, right? It's a way of problem solving. It's a way of seeing the possibility. We talk about how the imagination was taken away from us when colonizers came. And I think that a way of liberation and a way of truly embracing who we are, our culture and our value, is through the imagination and through daring to imagine.
No, for sure. I think that is the real power of art, right? And I think it is, hopefully we'll see more of it infiltrate and lead to better business outcomes. And I think the entire community and the world will benefit from it. So I look forward to it. And I admire people like you who are doing their part in making that a reality every day.
Well, and you in your space is pushing for, bringing more art programs, and maybe again, like I think that bringing an art resident,
That's a great idea.
It might not be super expensive, right? I mean, like artists unfortunately are not valued and are not given the value that they truly deserve around the world. But it might be a good investment where it's like, all right, show us what you're doing. And so I love the work that Can is doing, right?
Great organization.
And really postulating this idea of how can arts be like an innovator, and how can we push arts into these areas when we have, climate, the climate change is a reality. And in my situation, for instance, like climate migration is already happening, and it's going to happen all over the world. So like, how are we going to tackle this with proper laws and with, with an open mind in creating innovation and making sure that our climate impact and footprint is as small as possible?
Absolutely. No, great stuff. Thanks so much, Carolina. I know we're sort of out of time, but it's been a real pleasure chatting with you. And I think the arts resident thing, I'll definitely look into it. It's a great idea. It's such a simple, easy to execute kind of thing. And it makes so much sense, right? So we'll definitely look into that. Thanks for that suggestion.
Yeah, for sure. I think, okay, I'm going to stop.